wonderful speaker this evening. It's our March speaker series. So welcome and thank you for joining. I can't believe it's March already. I'm Erin Raftery-Ryan, the Executive Director of NAMI Westside Los Angeles. I see many familiar faces this evening, but for those of you who are new to NAMI, whether you're here live or watching on our YouTube channel, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We are the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to improving the lives of those living with mental health conditions and their loved ones. And we are the West Side affiliate. To learn more about our programs and services that are all free, you can visit our website at namiwla.org. Now, I'm very excited to introduce our wonderful speaker. Our March speaker is a recovery-based psychiatrist. For 27 years, he was the medical director at the Village in Long Beach, which is an award-winning model of recovery-based mental health care. In 2017, he moved on to be the only psychiatrist at CSU Long Beach to provide innovative psychiatric services for the students. He is the author of Journeys Beyond the Frontier, a rebellious guide to psychosis and other extraordinary experiences. This book is a comprehensive and accessible guide to psychosis, and it's filled with compassionate stories. His work is person-centered, working to help people grow and develop into the person that they're meant to be, not just to treat mental illnesses or conditions. To the long list of accomplishments, he is now a street psychologist who provides outreach to unhoused community members with a mobile clinic. His presentation this evening is entitled Recovery Perspectives of Homelessness and Mental Illness. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mark Ragins.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me this evening. Let's see if I can do technology a little bit to do a shared screen. Get this up there. I got a PowerPoint somewhere? Yes, I do. I probably have way too many slides, which is typical of me, and way too many words on each slide. So I'll talk some, and you guys can read in the background, or they're also there, and they're available. Oops, they're available for a reference as well. Okay, go forward. All right, can you guys see me? And can you see the slide, the name of this?
Yes, we can see both.
All right, so welcome aboard. So as Erin mentioned, I've been part of homelessness for quite a long time. I first went to Skid Row as a psych resident back in 1987, and then did a bunch of homeless things on and off at our drop-in center and stuff at the Village along the way. And even at Cal State Long Beach, had a surprisingly large number of homeless students there. But it's only now that this become a full-time job, and I'm going out with these medical teams, actually, with doctors and nurses, and these, you may have seen on TV, these big blue trucks that are these mobile clinics, and trying to do psychiatric work as part of a primary care team, which is really different. And since they only have one psychiatrist, I'm on all four teams. So one day a week, I'm in different parts of the whole city. So I can get anywhere from Lancaster to Long Beach or Pomona to Santa Monica, actually, which makes it hard to keep track of me or them. But I want to give just some of my perspectives. I've been there now for 6 months, only thing that's going along the way. And this is kind of a work in progress sort of thing, because I became more intensely involved now. And things are changing in the homeless world in Los Angeles. So the main perspective I want to start with is that I think we have two kind of sides to this. One side is people go, let's help people who are homeless. Let's go out and give them medical care. And isn't that great when we see one of our doctors out there bandaging a wound of somebody on the streets or handling things? Look at that compassion. People are always coming up to us saying, what good work you're doing, sort of things, which is really cool. And on the other thing, there's people saying, you know, God, do we have to have these people around? Can't we do something else? We don't need this in our neighborhood, and it's got these problems and dirt and theft and illness and all this stuff, and can't we move them on and get rid of them? And it isn't as clear as the two things being separated. I think almost everybody has both pieces in them, both sides. Some people bring out more or less of the one, and even trying both strategies at once, usually on top of each other and not necessarily that together. One of my very first days on this new job, I was at a place called Lafayette Park, which is in central LA near MacArthur Park. And there's a whole bunch of homeless people there in these tents and so forth, all around inside the park and on the street in front. And there's these kids from, they look at me maybe, I don't know, sixth graders from the school across the street. And they're doing PE running around this park by all the tents and around them, going around, and they're kind of sharing this space that way. I'm like, this just seems wrong to me. Should kids have to, like, when they're doing their PE running around the thing or skateboarding, like dodge homeless people in tents or something? I'm like, well, why do I think this is wrong? Actually, they live around them. Some of them, a family member has been homeless with this, and but this is this thing of, should it be part of our lives or communities or not? Should we help them or not? By the way, that place has been swept. There's now tiny homes across the street that's hidden behind a large hedge, and there aren't homeless people in that park or on the street anymore. And they keep getting. I don't know. They went to, and actually, I don't know what the sweeps accomplished, and nobody knows what happens one way or the other, good or bad, after them. But I think these two things are in battle with us, and probably will continue to be, with lots of ambivalence. Now, if you're looking at perspective, one thing I want to start with is the difference between a cross section, what you see if you just look at something, like when we do our homeless count, or I go out to a park like that and see something, and what things are like over the long term. Like, what happened to those people that we swept? Where are they belong? Are they going to come back? Are they worse? Are they better? What happened over time? And the weird thing is, if you look at things in a cross section, you can get real distortions because it comes up with these funny things that ends up happening, these funny conclusions. Let me give two examples. So let's assume, just for sake of argument, that 20% of all homeless people are long-term, and they stay in the streets for 5 years on average. Let's say 80% are short-term. They stay on the streets for 6 months on average. And let's say you go out there and do a point-in-time contact, and you say, how many will you see? You'll end up seeing 70% long-term and only 30% short-term, because the short-term people get off the street much rapider, and the long-term ones are there. So there's more of them than the ones that kept going by. For those of you who kind of like me, this is the equivalent of if you have a box of See's candy and everybody likes a certain kind, and those keep disappearing, and only the ones you don't like keep on. You say, oh, See's keep just putting in the crappy ones that nobody likes, because those keep moving on. But you'd come to the weird conclusion that says most people have been on the streets for 5 years, when in fact it's only 20%. You get this weird math problem from making short to long. A similar one, our local policeman says, 90% of all the people on the street are on meth. Conclusion I didn't want to believe, but in fact it seems to be more or less true, having wandered the streets. Now, does that mean that 90% of homeless people are on meth? Well, presumably being on meth makes it harder to get off the streets or get your life together, because it's bad for you. So let's say it makes it 10 times harder. Now let's do the same weird kind of math problem. Half the people are using meth and half aren't. And it's 10 times as hard to get off the streets using meth as not. And you go around and check, you will find 90% of the people on the streets on meth, even though only half of the homeless people are using it, because it makes you get stuck longer. Every bad thing is going to look much bigger because you get stuck longer. So these cross-sectional pictures are always going to vastly overestimate the bad things, or the things that are worse going along. And that's one of the things that alters your perspective of what's happening. You guys probably all seen this thing about this elephant, and different people see, and one's a snake and one's a tree, it's a spear, depending on what part they look at. We all look at different parts of homelessness. So for instance, I end up talking to people who all have serious mental illnesses going on, and all kinds of emotional problems and trauma and all this stuff happening. And my wife, who works for the school district and PTA, says, well, what about families? We have all these families who are homeless, and we give all kinds of stuff out in our school stuff to help them out. I say, she says, there's more homeless families in Torrance than there are in this entire count. When we go, we don't see that many. I said, so far, I haven't met a single kid on the street. Zero. It says, well, I've got 200 over here. Well, where do they actually live? How come I can't find them? that you're going to get, depending on where you come from, what kind of worker you are, what you're looking for, you're going to see a different cross section of people. Not only that, you'll see people at a different time in their life. Let me give you an example, and I'll change her story around a little bit, but try to keep it mostly her story. I was asked to go to see a lady who has been hospitalized 3 times in the last 6 months for running naked inside of traffic and stuff like this. And the med team and the police go pick her up and take her over to the hospital. And they're really sick of this, and she needs someone to take care of her. We can't let this keep happening. She's in the hospital, and we should put her on a conservatorship. And can't you go out and figure out what's wrong? She was terribly mentally ill, and someone should take care of this lady. That's the perspective of the person in this on the streets who called us and said, "I see this person naked." The policeman agreed. He said, "Yes, this person's a wreck. I think she should be on conservatorship." That's his perspective. That's when he saw her too. When I checked with the homeless worker who was attached to her, it's like, I don't know. Why are you interested in this one? She's kind of quiet and she stays kind of in her tent over there. She kind of takes care of herself, sees herself. She's really kind of defended and hard to get to know her. If you start bringing a bunch of mental health stuff, you're really going to scare her away. Are you sure you want to get involved with her? I'm just slowly building a relationship over 6 months or so. I don't see that bad anything going on. When I look up a record, I found a few years ago she went to one of our mental health centers. They saw this childhood trauma, and she'd been shot by a boyfriend, and she was looking kind of psychotic and hearing people, like people's thoughts were in her head, and they thought she had both PTSD and a psychotic disorder, and they wanted to help her, and they said, "You'd need meds," and she only wanted therapy, and they sent her to the psychiatrist repeatedly, and finally she asked to leave because she didn't want to keep having meds pushed on her and wanted just to have therapy, but they thought she was too psychotic for that. They had a different perspective. Interestingly, the ER, I found a record from the ER, what they took her to when she was messed up. They saw her, quickly gave her a shot of Zyprexa and Ativan, and the next morning came by and she looked fine again, and they let her go. They thought maybe this was speed. Everybody keeps thinking it's meth because 90% of people are on meth, but they know there's nowhere do we have a record that actually is. She denies it, but that doesn't actually help us much. And when I went out to see her, I saw a lady who was really cold and really hungry. She had no shoes and couldn't say where her shoes had come from, and came out her tent there. She comes out, kind of roused her at like 10 in the morning. Came out, and she had a jar of that peanut butter and jelly stuff she was eating with her fingers, going around, kind of starved. And the homeless people I was with had some meals and gave it, and she ate hers, wolfed it down, as did the guy she was sharing the tent with. And she started like sweeping up her place to make it look nice. And she was, from her point of view, her perspective is, I just don't get enough help. Her perspective is, when I was in foster care and then I tried to go to college, you didn't give enough help, and I was homeless and I couldn't complete my classes and had to drop out. Then when I had a baby, when I was pregnant, you gave me a $700 Section 8 certificate, and I couldn't find any landlord who would rent that to. And then when I had no place to go, you took my kid away. Then I come here and the church says, yeah, we have food, but we don't really want homeless people around. And the pool has showers, but they don't want homeless people around either. And just tell me to leave. These people are telling me to leave. I lived in this town before they came here. They want me to leave my own home just because I too poor and never got support ever since I was a kid. And you guys still won't pay any attention that I was shot by my boyfriend and help me with that. And you're just like the rest of them. You're here to just check boxes and get money. And I don't think you're going to help anyway. Get out of here. Notice how the same person, just at different times and from different points of view, can lead you to amazingly different plans of what to do. So here's the perspective that almost all of us come with. It's in every newspaper article, every part of it, that says, we closed the state mental hospitals, we gave them too much civil rights protection, we didn't put enough funding into the community mental health system, they left lots of people untreated who couldn't manage for themselves, they ended up neglected, they ended up on the streets and in jails, and we went way too far with this. We need to put back some hospitals, we need to get more ability to treat people against their will, and we need better treatment in the community to undo the damage we've caused. Almost all of us know this story. We see it in every single article around. But is this actually true? Here's a graph that's supposed to demonstrate that it's true. This is from Tom Insel's book that I've got over there. It's a site digression here. Tom Insel was the head of NIMH from 2002 to 2015 or something like that. He's funded $1 billion worth of research for biological things for schizophrenia and other mental illnesses. And he now writes a book that says he was in charge of Gavin Newsom's mental health committee thing. And he wrote a book that says, you know what? I made a mistake. Mental illness isn't just like all other illnesses. It affects your whole self and your mind and your family and everything around you. We've got to take a recovery point of view, a whole person point of view, not just a medical view. I spent all that money on trying to get basic biology when I should have paid more attention to the whole person and what's going on. And he was talked into this idea of people and places and purpose in life to recover. But he still shows this graph to say to go with the narrative that it's caused by institutionalization. And I first saw this graph about 10 years ago. And I said, wait a minute, go back there a minute. Look at this graph for a minute. If did one cause the other, shouldn't the two lines cross as like an X like this? One goes down and the other one goes up. Why is this one go down? And then in about 1980, both are kind of low. And then the other one starts going up, even when the other one's already almost flattened. Why is it moved like that? Why did it take like 20 years for them to go across to start ending up on the streets and things? What if that's really what happened? Why does the line go like that? And the person who was sitting next to me said, you want to know something else weird about this, Mark? Those people who were in the state hospitals, they were predominantly white women. I just saw a stat recently that said 3/4 of lobotomies were done to white women. I'm sorry, 3/4 of lobotomies were done to women, not necessarily white women, to women. And of course, the people in jail and on the streets are a small minority white women. They're heavily Black men of color. I'm sorry, men of color, Black and brown. So wait a minute, how did a set of white women in a hospital get let out and 20 years later start turning into men of color in the hospitals and the streets? And then one other thing that you can only see if you look at this carefully and know something about math, notice where it says the state hospital beds and the scale there goes from 0 to 500. And the one with the people incarcerated goes from 0 to 2,500. If we put this on the same scale, and we move down the one with the state hospitals, it would be all the way down almost to where that first little gray dot is. Just a little hill of mostly white women 20 years later turns into a giant mountain of men of color. Is this actually right? Or did something else happen in the 90s, in the 80s, that started that huge increase? When I showed this graph to a group of policemen in Washington State, they said, that's when the war on drugs started. I happen to notice in 1980, that's when they closed the housing projects. And they gave these HUD certificates, the secondary certificates. Well, they don't tell you about is they took 90% of the money out of the system when they did that. I wonder if we had a graph of the projects going away and housing going away and leading to homelessness and jailing. By the way, people in the projects look a lot more like the people in jail and in homeless today. Other stuff happened too. Let's see if we can put that in to make a story that's person-centered that makes more sense than this one that says we took them out of the hospitals. Now, you may or may not know Dr. Richard Lamb. He was my very best supervisor at USC. He died a few years ago in his 90s. A passionate advocate for mental illness. He was also a passionate supporter of NAMI. He brought a NAMI panel to us in our residency like 40 years ago when nobody else was talking about this. He began his career as a psych tech in the old asylums where they were doing ECT and lobotomies, but he didn't think that was terrible. He actually thought it gave people asylum and it gave people protection. And he was very much a biological psychiatrist. He hated the psychoanalysts. He hated his own psychoanalysis. It was strange because he like would smoke this pipe in our supervision, looked exactly like I thought a psychoanalyst was supposed to look. But he hated that. He said, nope, these are biological illnesses. They go downhill. Nobody recovers. They are a terrible burden on their families and everyone around, and they need to be protected from the stresses of life, was his belief system. And he did an amazingly courageous thing. This is like in the 70s. He goes into LA County Jail when there isn't a mental health system, when there isn't Twin Towers just for people with mental illnesses. And he goes talking to people. And he's wearing these medical model glasses as a psychiatrist who thinks, then what does he see? He sees the largest mental hospital in the world. He sees with a bunch of emotional and mental distress. He thinks they have mental illnesses. He sees people in an institution, like he's used to a mental hospital being an institution. And he comes up with this brilliant quote. What if he had different perspectives? What if he was someone who came from the world of childhood trauma or foster care and said, I noticed 80 to 90% of these people in jail have been traumatized, mostly sexual trauma, even the men. What if he came from the world of education and literacy and said, the number one factor in getting sent back to prison is illiteracy? What if he was one of those policemen and said, this looks like they're all on drugs to me, actually? Or what if he was like me and says, I wonder if they lost their public housing? Or I didn't mention to you that Richard Lamb is a white male. What if he came in with a Black Lives Matter perspective and says, maybe this has to do with racism? This is a very narrow perspective. And yet they control everything in the narrative, from how we get medications to how we do research to public education to how we train people to how we fund our whole system. This narrow perspective. And what if we open up our perspectives to something else? And the first thing I want to open it up is, instead of focusing on illnesses, and this isn't saying illnesses don't exist. Hospice focuses on people and not illnesses too. It doesn't pretend you don't have cancer, but it focuses on what you're going through. This says, let's focus on the whole person, their biological, emotional, social life, and how it unfolds along the way. The vast majority of people who are experiencing homelessness are stuck in a web of factors, not just experiencing a treatable mental illness. All kinds of stuff have happened. So we need strategies that are going to affect the whole person, not just their illness. Also, they have lots of things that affect their ability to get along with other people or accept help. The quote there at the bottom is from my other good supervisors. We used to complain about people in our group therapy when we're learning how to do group therapy. And he said, wow, if these people didn't have what was wrong with them, they'd be so much easier to treat. Lady I met today, she speaks mostly Korean, but even with the translator, that didn't help. It's almost impossible to understand anything she says. Every question is just answered vaguely. She's like in her 60s, and I don't know what's wrong with her. I eventually found some old records that says 20 years ago she presented about the same way, so it's probably not dementia. But it's very hard. Getting her help is very hard because you can't even really talk to her. So she sits with not even a tent, all by herself, and just no benefits, and just lives off of food and stuff people bring her around the neighborhood. And apparently that's been for 20 years. Let's talk about the whole web of things happening. Let's start as a person. So let's start with trauma. People who have homeless experience lots and lots of trauma. Some of it is an adult, some of it is while on the streets. Lady I was talking today was just overwhelmed by the number of traumas, including several rapes and kidnapping along the way, but especially about childhood trauma. Now, the illness point of view says, well, when you're traumatized, you have fight or flight or freeze, and you can get stuck with these. And that makes you an anxiety disorder, dissociative disorder, like this. And I met a lady last week who was raped about 5 years ago by a stranger in a park, and she never really recovered. She lost her innocence. She lost all her carefreeness. She overthinks. She's anxious. She says, I lost all my feelings and stuff. And then she can't really work very well, and she didn't have enough money, and now she's been homeless for only a few months, actually. The other thing is, when something terrible happens, overwhelming, sometimes we repress this, and then it turns back and it keeps trying to come out as reliving things as nightmares and flashbacks, and we tend to call that PTSD. But there's way more to trauma than just the illnesses. It affects your whole person along the way. If this is a, I don't know if you guys know Gabor Mate, this is a really interesting book. He's an addiction doctor who was an orphaned in Hungary in World War II when his Jewish family. And he works at Skid Row in Vancouver. And he's working with these people who are using tons and tons of drugs and acting really badly in these kind of wet housing places there. And he's trying to help them as a primary care and addiction doctor. And he's trying to come to terms with both his own trauma and also theirs and how it fits in. And it's a good book that combines how, wait, their biology, when were traumatized, made their reward systems different. And so they have different relationships, and then they use drugs to change them even more. And now it's stuck in this vicious cycle and very hard to get them out of this. And he puts together this nice picture of the biology of trauma and addiction. Another World War II survivor, Dr. Bezo van der Kolk, he had the misfortune to be being born in Amsterdam in 1941 when the Nazis were there, and his parents were badly traumatized along the way. And he's made trauma his life's work. This is perhaps the best trauma textbook, The Body Keeps Its Score. He says that we got to put in a diagnosis in our book that's called developmental trauma disorder that says this has effects on you. It changes how you can pay attention to things, how you regulate your emotions, how your personality is structured. Everything is changes about you. And this causes huge amounts of depression, alcoholism, drug abuse, and suicide along the way. And every time he gets rejected, including by DSM-5, and you can see the quotes there that he says, well, we don't really need that development trauma notion. We can just call them depression, anxiety. And, maybe it caused disorder. That's not really a research-based fact. Oh, really? Here's a piece of research. And I don't know if guys have seen the ACEs study. This is done on white middle-class people at Kaiser in San Diego. Fairly straightforward population study. They looked and asked people these 10 questions. Did these things happen to you? Bad things when you're growing up. And you get a score, 0 to 10. Very straightforward. Then they look and say, all right, how does it work out? A third of people in this group said nothing like that had happened to them. Half had 1 to 3 of these things happen, and a few had more than 3. And then they looked at, well, how many of you have these negative things? Notice the second box down below with 3 things, bad things happen. It's not just one thing along the way, but 3 bad things. So you had substantial disruption. Look at those odds compared to the people with none. The smoking is doubled. The alcohol is, what is that, 7-fold. IV drugs is 10-fold, double the heart disease, and 10 times the suicide attempts. There is a dose effect. If you get even more trauma, it becomes even worse. But notice it's already, most of the difference is already there just by the first few. And they came up with their theory about how this gets all there, that it disrupts your neural development, your social development, and then you do bad, risky things, and then you get more diseases, and then you die. Almost everybody I talk to has multiple of these risk factors along the way. I'll be given a referral that says, oh, I'm giving this person Suboxone to get off of, try to get off their heroin. They're also using meth. Can you do something to help with that? I'll say, okay. And my first thing is, so what do you think is going to be hard for you to, if you try to get off of drugs? And he says, I never really dealt with it. My biological dad murdered my mom. At which point the physical doctor, primary care doctor said, I think you get to take care of this, Mark. That's more trauma than I want to deal with. There's lots and lots of this childhood trauma. And the key question we're trying to work with people, the implication here is not instead of asking always what's wrong with you, what happened to you and how did it affect you? This isn't just about treating these trauma illnesses or anxiety conditions. It's about realizing they're going to experience everything around as an extension of their trauma. The lady I was talking about in the tent, who is very defensive, she experiences me as an extension of the abuse she had when she was a kid, the foster care, and all the stuff that has happened along the way. I mean, what does he mean by their side of the hand? So you have to look at me for a minute for this story. And if you've watched me before, you know I've told this story before, but I like it. A guy comes to my office late one afternoon. He holds up his hand like this. He says, "What do you see?" I said, "I see your hand." He says, "No, be more specific." I said, "All right, it's late, but I can do this. I see the swirls of your fingerprints. I see the creases between your knuckles, and I see your love line and your lifeline. I don't know which one's which, but I can see them." He says, "When you can see nails and knuckles and hair, you will be able to start helping me because you'll be seeing the world from my side instead of from yours." If you're going to collaborate with them, if you're going to help them, what does the world look like to them? I can see a cold, hungry girl. Someone else can see a psychotic girl who needs to be taken care of. She sees herself as someone who just isn't getting enough help and is being rejected by the very community she grew up in. Now, number two, is their development gotten distorted or delayed along the way growing up? There's lots of reasons for this could have happened. Maybe their parents had all kinds of problems themselves. Lady I talked to who was raped in the park, her mom was also a single mom trying to raise a bunch of family on her own. And her mom is homeless now in a different park, and so are three of her other brothers and sisters. I was supposed to raise her above that when that's what she grew up in. How distracted or traumatized were they along the way? If they're being sexually molested, how well did they actually do in school? How deprived or fragmented was his environment? They keep moving around. I've met a kid. His his family's been homeless since he was 14. Between 18 and 22 now, he's been living in a tent next to his parents' tent on the street since he left. He dropped out of high school, and he's really kind of weird. But is that a diagnosis? Or if you took my kid and had him sitting on the street in a tent with just his phone next to me and my wife, how weird would that have turned out? Instead of sending him to a college dorm. Are there other things that interfere? Developmental disorders, emotional things, ADHD, psychosis, drug abuse when he was a little kid, then weird environments? Or they just have problems with intellectual, and so the world doesn't make enough sense? I got one guy I go out to and I bring little toy cars from him because he's kind of at this kid level. He was kind of aggressive in third grade and got into problems in that because he can't figure things out. And he's still like that. He's 42 years old and lives in a tent really far away behind a train track because he can't get along with anybody well enough. He's never grew much past where he was then. I think I'll skip this one, but because I'm realizing I'm running pretty late, but this development goes at each level along the way. And if you expect people to be really responsible and think forward thinking and make plans and follow through and be motivated, they may not be that level. Lots of what we call mental illness may actually be immaturity or distorted development, and they're working at a lower level. They just magically expect things to appear and it's going to work out. It's like you're working with someone who's emotionally 7 years old, and you wonder why they can't do elaborate plans along the way, or they're not following through with their diabetes treatment or their psych meds. Motivation goes like this too. If you're a little kid, you just try to avoid being punished. This is the Bart Simpson stage. I didn't do it. Most of the people in jail are at this stage. I didn't do it. It wasn't my fault. The next stage is seeking rewards. This is why you put all those stars on the refrigerators and stuff to get rewards and stuff, and teachers do this and along the way. And that's better because then you want to take responsibility. If you're just avoiding punishment, you don't learn responsibility. After a while, you give yourself your rewards instead of doing everything for the grades, for instance. And then you've got your peer group, what people around, and then you can do things for higher principles. When we say, hey, this person isn't motivated and follow through, what level are they at? Is what we're doing at the same level they're actually at? If they're just trying to avoid punishment, they might try to avoid us because they see us more as someone who's telling them what's wrong than someone who's helpful. To grow like this, whether you're a kid or an adult or homeless or any of us, the more experiences you have in your life that what you do makes a difference, the more likely you are to take self-responsible action to recover. This is terrible in the jail. People say, oh, why are you here? Because I had a bad lawyer. And in fact, the legal system is so bizarre, that may be true. The more service is emphasized, what are you going to do? How are you going to take responsibility instead of caretaking or coercing? The more chance they will grow to be able to take self-responsibility to actually live to be a person who can take care of an apartment. Having natural consequences that actually result when you do something, it happens. When you don't do it, it doesn't happen, is really helpful. But our current system is bizarre in this way for homelessness. Almost everybody I meet in the street says, I say, so you expect the rest of your life to be like this, or you expect to get off the streets? They say, oh, no, I'm not going to be here forever. I'm going to get off these streets. I'm going to move on. Well, how are you going to do that? Like 1 in 10 says, I'm going to get my act together and go back to work or take care of things. The rest say, I hear there's a homeless crisis and there's lots of resources and they're building new programs. They got these vouchers and giving out things, and these case workers are walking around. I just hope one of them gives me a place to stay. And frankly, the system is so impressively complicated, I can't figure out how you get a voucher or get a place to stay or get into a tiny homes waiting list. There's like hundreds of workers scattered all over the place doing this. But my point isn't that that's messed up. My point is that does not build any self-responsibility so they can actually grow. You want them to build strengths from these struggles there so they can actually grow and overcome this. Can you get feeling determination or hopefulness? Can you get some money or some benefits or some housing with friends? Can you start making meaning of this is helping me be the person I was meant to be? You don't take my mental health for granted. You connect to other people, learn more compassionate. And I think very little of our services or responses to homelessness help people build strengths. By contrast, when someone is raped, we do therapy about how you build strengths. When someone's a battered woman, we do therapy about how you build strength. When someone has somebody die, and we're comforting, how do you build strength? When someone goes through cancer, we have how do you build strength? All those are, we say recovery is part of building strengths. We don't talk about how you recover from homelessness, build strengths, what's going to happen. Neither of the two approaches in that very first slide about taking care of people or getting rid of them helps build their strengths. 3, many of the people say they got homeless because something bad happened. Breakups is real common. Your kids taken away. You want to prevent homelessness, go to the dependency court. And every time you got a woman whose kid's taken away because she's still using drugs and take away her Section 8, she's going to be homeless next week. Creating huge numbers of homeless people from women who can't take care of their kids, usually on drugs, and make a mess of things and lose their place. Also, the person you were living with, your parents died. The person you were sharing rent with died. You lost a job. You got put out of foster care like the lady I started with. You get to jail, or you get some terrible medical condition and you just end up on the streets having these things happen. But everybody doesn't end up on the streets when something bad happens. What is different about these people? And what's different is they're missing protective factors. This little pretend graph here is from a guy named Carl Bell. He's a child psychiatrist in Chicago on the East Side. And in the first graph, that blue line says, if bad things happen to kids, they get more messed up and more mental illness symptoms. That kind of makes sense. He says, but that's in the absence of protective factors. If you have protective factors, if bad things happen, you can handle them. It doesn't get that much worse. What are his protective factors? Enough money to make it through the end of the month and a little extra emergency. So, if your car breaks down, you need a $300 carburetor or something, you don't lose your job and your family and everything falls apart. A reasonably safe, secure place to live. So you've got some basis to be. Some kind of family support. It doesn't need to be like a perfect functional family, just a family who cares about you. Some other caring adults around to help you out, like neighbors or coaches or ministers or professional or something. Some role in life besides being a mentally ill or a bad kid, some spiritual beliefs and practices, and some psychological or emotional growth or development. This is what separated out the college students I saw who went through all kinds of adverse events there. They had many more protective factors than the homeless people did. Especially they had identities of what they're trying to be. And they often had other caring adults and families there along the way. So let me go way back to that first graph about what happened in 1980. Every single one of these protective factors has been deteriorating since 1980. The wealth discrepancy and the minimum wage has gone down and people have gotten poor at the bottom edge. You can't afford to live in the same neighborhood as your parents if you do exactly the same job and income as your parents in any neighborhood in Los Angeles. We got rid of a bunch of the public housing. It's getting less and less. Families are more deteriorated. There's more and more divorces, more breakups, more different things along the way than back then. There's less social connections, less people volunteering, less of these clubs and churches and stuff helping out with things. We're labeling more and more people as having a mental illness or various things wrong with you instead of building on their strengths. You look at the kids and they do these surveys. In the pandemic, how many of you are struggling with depression, anxiety? And they all say yes. Well, 3/4. Certainly religion and spirituality is less than it once was, and kids aren't growing as well psychologically. And you could argue that's they spend way too much time on their telephone and way too much time in a pandemic. Like 4, drugs and alcohol are bad for you. They may do some good things for some people, but mostly they do a bunch of bad things. And lots of the people have used drugs who are on the streets. It can, if you use them when you're young, it can impact your brain development. It can certainly change your emotional development. You start getting more into drugs instead of into growing as a person. All kinds of terrible things happen because of drugs, like violence and sexual assault, and jails and breakups, losing your kids, taking away jobs, homelessness. The addictive habits start taking over your life. Most of the homeless people I meet, they spend their day trying to figure out how they're going to get something to eat and some drugs. That's what their concern is. They don't have a space away from those concerns. They can cause physical illnesses, heart disease, neurologic things, seizures, and psychiatric things. And they are heavy contributors to why people die, both of overdoses and heart disease. I don't have enough time for all this piece. Let me show you just this one. 30 years ago, I was taught this one to say, when you're talking to people who are using drugs, divide it into 4 categories. First one is engagement. For people who say they're not using, just try to make a relationship and connect so you can have a conversation. For people who say they're using but don't want to stop, how are you going to persuade them to stop? For those who do want to stop, how do you do active treatment? And for those who do relapse, who have already stopped, how do you keep them from relapsing again? It isn't just the same approach for everybody. We've invented 2 other things to go with this lately that you probably see on the streets a lot. We're all using this. One is harm reduction. This used to be, we saw that you're wanting people to bottom out, something bad to happen, so then they'll want to change. You're just enabling them if you're helping them go along. But the fact is, sometimes bottoming out just makes people entirely helpless and can't do anything. You're actually more likely to stop if you still have something to lose than if you've lost everything. And also, if someone gets something like a place to stay, and they lose it for using drugs, and get another one, and lose it, and get another, that's a better learning if they just stay there and say, when you're clean, come and I'll give you a place to stay. Let alone if they've got terrible heart disease and they've turned themselves psychotic from meth. Even if you stop, it makes it harder to get your life back. So we do lots of harm reduction and naloxone to avoid overdoses, clean needles, and meth pipes, blankets, water, snacks, even hotel rooms and vouchers sometimes, especially when it gets really cold like this. Housing first is another new technique that says you don't have to be clean to come into our places. Almost all of our new program, these transitional things, there's people using drugs and alcohol and being a pain in the ass in them. Because if you don't let them do that, they're not going to move in. Then you have some chance of them stopping once they're there. A problem, though, is that it's really hard for the people who want to get clean to do so when other people are using all around them like this. And we don't sort our places by having this one's dry, this one's damp, and this one is wet that you're using all over the place, just a little bit and not at all. A huge advantage over the years since I started this is since we're using a lot of harm reduction housing first, since we've calmed down the war on drugs and we're not arresting everybody for using drugs, and since we don't say you can't have any pills, you can't be in this clinic, you can't be in this housing if you're using drugs, people aren't hiding it and lying about it as much. So I can have conversations from the very first conversation about what's the role of drugs in your life and how you think you're going to get off them to get your life together. Whereas it would take years before to get them to stop lying about it before if they ever stop. Read that one off. The opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. If someone stops using, let me give a story. A guy met in Whittier Narrows Park. He was using heroin. He decided he wanted to get clean. He went to a program. They put him in a program in Long Beach, even though he was from Whittier. He did the program. He graduated from him. He did good in the 60 or 90 days it was. He went on to a sober living, which they also put him down there. And he stayed there in the sober living with nothing much to do. Didn't know anyone there. He was kind of bored and just sitting there, and he stayed there for another about 3 or 4 months. And then he came back to the park because he was lonely and he knew people there and he had a role and people connected back there. He was saying, he said, I haven't gone back to drugs yet. Can you give me, I don't have any they were giving me meds in the program too, and I can't get any out on the street. Can you give me any meds here? And I did. I'm pretty sure he's going to end up back on drugs like this, though. But just getting him to be sober and sitting there with nothing to do in a sober living that's cheap with nothing for his life, that is not going to get his life together. People need work to overcome their shame and guilt. They need jobs and purpose to feel productive and meaningful. They need emotional relationships to love and grow. Lots of people get that by becoming alcohol counselors and giving back and helping others, but that isn't the only way to get meaning and connection in your life. What are your core gifts? How do you give to others? If you're just living, you have to be living, not just existing to be able to sustain recovery. So I'm out there at the beginning telling people, I'm not just urging, you better stop the meth because your heart's falling apart. I'm saying, so can we imagine what your life might be? What did you want to be when you grew up? What do you want to do with the rest of your life? Do you think you could have vacations? Do you think you might get to see your kids? What are the positives to your life? Not just, can we get you sober? Can we recover your life? 5, how about mental illnesses? Isn't that what I said I was going to talk about in the first place? And people say, well, everyone out there has mental illness. And I say, well, that depends what you mean by a mental illness. And I say, well, don't you have this big book that says what mental illnesses are? Well, we do have this big book. And this book contains a statistical clusters of the way people are distressed or feel things. That's why it's called Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, DSM. It doesn't talk about underlying causes. The disorders it describes are the results, not the causes. You tell them you're sad, and it says you're sad and I don't sleep much and I overthink and I'm got no energy. I'm not interested in sex. They say, all right, you have a depression. That doesn't say why you're depression. That's the outcome. It doesn't talk about these mental processes or psychological processes. It doesn't talk about development, either normal or pathological, and it doesn't include the serious stresses. Rape is not in that book. Battered woman is not in that book. Kids taken away that book is not in that book. Racism is not in that book. Foster care is not in that book. Adult children of alcoholics is not in that book. Because those are causes, not results. The diagnosis, as we currently use them, give the illusion that we understand things. But it's just giving back the results in fancy language. It's not giving you how you got to that spot or how you got stuck with these symptoms going round and round. Here's what the alternative looks like. This is what I used to tell the college students. We're all born with our strengths and our weaknesses, our talents and our temperaments, our good things and our bad things. We're even born with a blueprint for our growth and development. Comes in our DNA and factory packaging. And then you're born and life happens. And sometimes it's warm and supportive and you blossom and grow. Sometimes it's traumatic and terrible and you end up twisted or broken or growing in ways you never wanted to. Lots of times it's both. But in any case, you've ended up moving along and you've gotten stuck. And you're going round and round. I can't get past this rape. I can't get past that I didn't make it as a high school football star. I can't get past that this man I trusted beat me up through my marriage. I can't get past whatever these things are happened to me. I've gotten stuck. I'm on the streets. I can't get out of this. I'm on meth every day and I can't get out of this. It's just going round and round. I started imagining more, talking to myself, and now they're talking to me all the time and I can't get out of this. I just sit here talking to voices. I can't get out of this. It's going round and round and round. I'm in a terrible depression. I can't get round and round and round. That being stuck in the round and round is what we actually call mental illnesses. And restarting growth, getting unstuck, is how people recover. Medications can be used to reduce the symptoms, the results of all this stuff, so that you can get unstuck and grow. And if you do that, maybe you can get off your meds if you get things growing and moving again. If you just stay on the same meds just to feel better while staying stuck, you're going to stay stuck. Lots and lots of people, even with psychosis, can get their lives going like 2/3. You may need some meds to get it started, get back on track, and then some rehabilitation, a place to go, and some jobs and stuff. You can get your life going again and then not need the meds in many cases. But that's not how we usually look at it. Another word about medications is I do hand out lots of pills. We don't have to use pills based on what your diagnosis or illness is. We can use them for what I call the 3Ds. We can use them to help you with what is distress. I'm just feeling terrible. These voices are harassing me. I'm manic. I'm panicking. I'm can't sleep. Or I'm dysfunctional. I can't communicate with somebody else. I'm too agitated. I can't have any relationships. I can't focus on work. Can't focus on school. Or I'm stuck in my development. I can't move forwards in my life. I'm just stuck here. So, for example, some of the pills we call antidepressants can be very helpful with negative thinking, or poor energy or sleep, or feeling weighed down by your emotions, or having an overactive alarm system. Helping with those things might help you get unstuck and feel better and function better. Some of the pills we call antipsychotics are helpful with feeling more mentally together and rational, being able to fight off voice or demons, not picking up everyone's emotions around you, not getting too fragmented, getting too fearful, aggressive. A lady today who had both a bunch of trauma and a bunch of paranoia, I told her that Abilify might help you feel more glued together and grounded. She said, I don't have schizophrenia. I'm not paranoid. I know, but you can have two choice of meds. One might help you less overthink. One might feel glued. What do you think? Which would you rather? What's the change that meds might do that might help you get unstuck and moving together? And if you talk like that, you don't get stuck in this business about no insight or I don't want to take pills forever. All right, putting it all together. And this slide is a work in progress. If we say what happens to homeless people along the way, the process of becoming homeless and recovering, the red side of the arrow going down is the items I talked about along the way. Lots of childhood trauma, lots of emotional maturity distortions. You don't have protective factors, so crises turn into disasters. Lots of drug use, losing things and getting excluded and thrown out of stuff, getting stuck, and your mental illnesses start getting worse and worse, getting medical conditions, and dying 20 years early. How do you get out of it? Got to remember who you are, what you wanted to be, to grow up to have some hope, some purpose, that I'm going to be something. Get some supportive connections and resources. Get yourself free from the substances. Build your health and mental health. Do some healing. Get some productive roles and reconnect to your family and community. When we worked at the village doing this, half of everybody, the first thing they want to do when they were doing better was reconnect to their families. In like the first 6 months of doing better. These things don't have to go in order, either down or up, and everyone's varied. This isn't like, a menu they go like, this isn't like penicillin for an infection. But this is an overview of, wait, where are you in this cycle? What's happened to you? That's very different from the original perspective I showed you that said, we emptied the hospital, you're stuck out there, we need to get you on shots, need to get back in the hospital. It's a very different whole personal way of looking at it. How does NAMI fit in? The recovery model doesn't rely on more and more professionals to provide all these services, which you all know we're terribly short of, and we've got waiting lists for any kind of professional services. And I'll wait for you to give the meds at work, and you're trying to help people who are uncooperative, impoverished, and isolated. Examples of, so anybody can be helpful. Examples of things NAMI can do, and I've seen a bunch of these. One is you can do outreach things. You can be part of outreach teams, helping, giving out charity or doing harm reduction, or just rehumanizing people. Lots of times just talking to somebody who everyone else is walking around can make them feel human again. I didn't just see an addict or a creepy person. I actually went and talked to him. Hey, I got some extra food here. You want some? Letting someone take a shower at the pool, or if you're the librarian, let them sit there. Creating drop-in centers so they've got a safe place to actually be. These are in terribly short supply. The village used to have one. It doesn't anymore. And yes, the one at Step Up on 2nd Street was established by a mom. The LAMP was set up by Molly Lowry, who didn't have any professional degrees, but they are under fire. The one Mental Health America runs in Santa Ana is being sued by the city of Santa Ana because they're a nuisance trying to close them. You can help with job opportunities. Anyone want to work for a day or volunteer or help out so you got something in meaning? Those of you who have background in 12-step can help take people to meetings or help be part of programs and help people get better. Many programs are run by non-professionals. You can sponsor people. You can do moral inventory steps with people. That 3, 4, 5, you can be the one that they share with. Peer support. Your guys tell in your own word stories is already excelling at this, of sharing stories of hope, helping with people with trauma. I went through stuff like that. Voice Hearers is a group about people hearing voices and how you can help come to terms and overcome that from a peer point of view. And this one I put on the list, although I have not seen it because I think there's a distinct possibility for NAMI. I realize NAMI isn't just about families, but that is your roots and your core in some way. And we think about many of these people have lost their family roles and family skills and family losses. How can we help you reconnect to your parents or to your adult children? Or if your kids were taken away, to help you visit foster kids or help make some kind of connection out there. Some parenting mentoring, how you can do the better job of this, making amends to your kids or your parents or stuff, or work on forgiveness of your parents or whoever abused you or things along the way. I think NAMI maybe offer a great deal of experiential wisdom in families that professionals don't necessarily. I got the idea that says NAMI can be a key provider of recovery services from Ken Duckworth's new book, which is an official NAMI book. You Are Not Alone. There's a picture there. This is a nice book if you guys haven't read it. And it's filled with descriptions of programs that various NAMI chapters are running that do various helpful things that the system isn't doing. Because his belief is, let's do illness things and recovery. We don't have to be arguing one against the other. He said NAMI doesn't have to be a champion just of illness, disease things. It can be an actual provider of recovery-based things that many people need. That's the end for me. I'm going to shut up and let people have questions and react and stuff. I know I ran over a bit. I promoted about 4 different books. Let me promote mine for a second too. It's Journeys Beyond the Frontier. It's rather long, but it's really cool about psychosis and really easy to read. You can find stuff at the website as well. When I get really good at it, I'll put like this YouTube video on the website along the way. All right, let me unscreen share and see what you guys are up to. Did I put everyone to sleep? How about remove spot? Oh, there you go. Someone did it for me. Good. What are you guys thinking? Just unmute and say things or raise hands or chat or whatever you want.
I just want to give you a quick round of applause, Dr.
Yeah,
Mark
me too.
Ragins. Thank you so much. I found it absolutely fascinating. And yes, we'll open the floor for questions.
Go ahead, Deborah.
You're muted.
I'm muted? No,
No,
you're
Debbie's
muted, Deborah.
muted.
Debbie, you're muted.
Debbie, you have to unmute yourself.
There you go.
There you go.
I'm
All
so
right, Debbie.
technologically savvy. I don't know my ass from hunger. Anyway,
What a great British accent you got too there.
Thank you. I understand what you said. But the thing is, there's this dichotomy. There are so many people on the street that are flagrantly psychotic, and that they, when you read on the Nextdoor app, people are defecating on somebody's doorstep. They're masturbating in front of children on the street and so on. I mean, no, I'm just talking about, I'm not everybody, but some.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can approach somebody and ask them about their trauma and then talk about other things when somebody is really compos mentis. But when somebody is flagrantly psychotic, it's extremely difficult to get through to them. And plus, we do not have enough mental health people. You said NAMI can do some things. Yeah, there are ancillary roles, the same as there are nurse practitioners that can help when doctors are not available. It's not the same thing. But how can we have enough mental health people ever to help all these people that are homeless or not even homeless and just mentally ill and can't access services? We have a major problem. The system is broken. Your talk is good, but the system is broken.
So I'm actually, let me say a couple things in response. I'm not saying the system's working. I'm far from saying we have a recovery-based system. I'm saying if we're fixing it, let's build recovery-based things instead of building more coercive things. Like there's no good reason, well, there's a bunch of reasons, but why we can't, clubhouses cost about $300,000 a year to run. We should have like 4 in every spa. And we've got like 2 in the whole county. So this goes to your thing. So many people do much better in a supportive environment. So the village did have people incredibly psychotic wandering through all the time. And sometimes it took a while to talk to them. So I think we're hospitalized and come back or this or that. And I did the out pills and out shots and we their meds and stuff. But many people within that environment were able to, over time, slowly come back and recover and do amazing things along the way. Where our current environment puts so much pressure on just the meds while people are deprived of everything else that the meds aren't good enough to be able to pull that off. And then, as you point out, we need jillions and jillions of doctors. If we say the meds are just going to be a part of the picture, I was handing out meds as all these things, all these jobs are handing out meds. But I'm doing it with the support of everything else around so I can be much more effective. Your workforce thing is absolutely true. And especially psychiatrists we've created more and more doctors of other kinds, but not psychiatrists. And I could do a long digression about how interns and surgeons control the entrances to medical schools. And so people who would become good psychiatrists never get there. Nobody's actually trying to make more psychiatrists in any reasonable way. And we're short of mental health professionals overall. But even if we had lots and lots, and we certainly do not, I would rather have psychiatrists working in drop-in centers and working in clinics. And when I said, hey, I want to come back to the county mental health, I said, where do you got? Yeah, I can work where I can be in a spot where I'm not just sitting handing out pills as fast as I can or in a jail. They said, nowhere. We don't have any jobs that look like that, except this one I found wandering around the streets. And then we have psychiatrists who just quit as a result. Half of all psychiatrists aren't in the system in any way. And I think if we gave jobs as part of recovery things, that you were part of this community, you had all this help, things were doing better, and you're working. I did this for 20-something years. It's a much better job. And I think we would retain and recruit people much better. And we still wouldn't have enough. But at least we'd be doing we'd be rebuilding in a better way.
Thank you.
It's my 2 cents worth on that, Debbie. It's not that you're wrong.
Jean Harris's hand is up. Jean, would you like
Where
to?
are you?
Jean.
Oh, her hand is up because I said I did. Her hand's been up the whole time. She might want to say something, but her hand was.
Yes, I think she does. Jean, would you
Go ahead,
like
Jean.
to share something?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I'm always so inspired hearing you talk, Dr. Ragins. I'm blessed to have met you and have your books. But the point that you brought up about persons experiencing psychosis and the possibility that they do not have to be on medication for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Because obviously we need to have a medical model to help them taper down and monitor them to make sure they're going to be okay. But I feel that there are a lot of people medicated for life on medications that reduce their ability to function.
So I hesitated before throwing that sentence, knowing that it's a giant bone of contention and controversy, especially within NAMI circles, but in general, that's not you're different than anyone else in this. But I was actually, do you guys know who Courtney Harding is or was? I'll do a little digression about Courtney Harding, and because I was helping edit a book that she's writing, and who she is. She was this 40-year-old divorced mom of a couple kids who was a nurse who went back to become a psychologist. And they said, well, what are you going to do for your thesis? And one of her supervisors says, there was this program back in Vermont at the state hospital that would try to get people out of the hospital, kind of this halfway housing and rehabilitation. And that was like 25 years ago. And we wonder what happened to them. How about doing that for your thesis? Now, as it happens, they gave her a huge pile of money in an NIH grant. She got all kinds of expert help with kind of things. And she did the research, not just on illnesses. She did the whole person. They did these interviews for 5 hours in people's houses, drinking tea with them and having dinner. They asked about their jobs and their lives. And what she found was 2/3 of the people, when he went back 25 years later, had recovered. That meant that they had like 10% had symptoms, 10% had been in the hospital, half of them were working, a bunch of them were older, they had friends, they had active social lives. But what struck me this time through the day, I'd seen, that's a 1989 study. But what struck me this time through is she included data about were they taking meds. And it turned out none of the people who had recovered were taking their meds anymore. The only people who are still taking the meds were the people doing the worst. Now, our normal explanation is, well, that makes sense. If you're doing worse, just stay on your bed and run. But I think what happened and what this looks like is that first 2 years in that halfway house, it was run by the Department of Voc Rehab in Vermont. They did have a really good doctor helping them not be over-medicated. And all he had was like Thorazine and Mellaril. And he's given these meds to help them over that hump, to get it started in concert with the rest of this. But as rapidly as possible, got them to their own housing, to own social connections, to own employment. SSI wasn't even invented then. And when they did that and had all this stuff going for them, then they were able to taper down or stop, or many of them had like pills laying around for a case I need it someday, or some of them were like lying to their doctors and saying they were taking them, they were just putting the bottles on the side. But I was impressed that that message of this group that said, you know what, if you did a bunch of stuff for the first couple of years, and I think meds may be really quite important at the beginning, that you can get off them once you get unstuck. And once you get this kind of jobs and apartments and connections and stuff going. But we so rarely, all right, you're stabilized, we'll see you now every 6 months, take your shot and live in this board and care. We so rarely do the next piece, which is what it would take to get off. Then your point, Gene, is, so how do you get off responsibly and you don't relapse and you don't have this stuff happen? There is a group in Seattle called Physicians for Responsible Prescribing, I think, or Excellence in Mental Health, who are working on it. But these studies are really hard to do. And of course, you can't get any drug company funding for how to get off of your pills.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to, it appears slower is better. Seeing when things get, and learning from each time, because you may not make it work the first time or even the second time or the third time. Learn each time, what do I need to do differently? When do I need little bits and how to make that happen to be able to pull it off? And different meds are different and different people are different. What got you into this in the first place? What have you learned or changed? How are you growing and developing? But I don't remember a single class in how you get off pills. And the more we give the pills to the primary care doctors, the less we're going to get off pills, because they never get you off anything.
Yeah, they just keep adding more.
How many of
And
you ever got off your blood pressure pills or your cholesterol? I take my cholesterol pills and I still eat shitty. But that didn't actually, how do I get off of them? Well, you stop eating hamburgers is how you get off of them. But I didn't make the change. I kept doing the same thing and staying stuck, and now I stay with the pills.
well,
And if
to
I
this
stop them, my
point,
cholesterol will go back up.
I think we don't hear enough recovery stories. We hear horror stories, and they abound, but we do not hear. I was at a venue having dinner and listening to live music with my friends, and I was fundraising for NAMI walks, and I was handing out flyers, and the manager of the restaurant walked up to me and said, "Here, I would like to make a donation. I have schizophrenia."
Oh God, Jane.
Beautiful. And that's once again what your guys' roles can, because by and large, people like me and Debbie are going to end up stuck with the people who are doing the worst and not getting better. Because you get better, you stop seeing us. So we're going to think everybody's doing bad. But people like you guys, like I went to a NAMI, one of my favorite NAMIs was up at UC Davis. And it was mostly like these professors and stuff, and their kids were doing really well. And so that was the expectation. That was the culture. And they were helping each other, running things like camping clubs and bicycling, because everybody bicycles at UC Davis. And many of them were going back to school and doing things. And the whole atmosphere wasn't about how do we handle this burden and worry about their kids doing terrible in these horror stories, which exist certainly. But the atmosphere and the culture was dominated by the kids who were doing well and going back to college and doing things. And that created a whole different atmosphere. We have so few places that have a culture of hope and that emphasize the people doing the best along the way. Yeah, Sharon.
Yes, I just want to say Mark Ragins definitely doesn't eat well. Every time I invited him to speak for NAMI Westside LA, he always said, "I'll do it, Sharon, if you take me to Tito's Tacos." I won't do it otherwise. So that was always, I had to promise Tito's Tacos to get him to speak for us. And
Some people never forget
with
things.
this issue of homelessness myself. Yesterday, I was driving by CVS in the rain, and there was a woman sitting out in front of CVS, and her vagina was showing. She was just had her clothes up and was wet, and I wanted to stop and go in CVS and get her underpants and socks and shoes. And then there was another man I saw homeless yesterday who's been in Westwood for years. And he had a rain hat on and a coat, but he had no socks and shoes. And you could see his feet were freezing. I wanted to go buy him in CVS socks and shoes. But I had 2 clients on Zoom right at that time, and I had to rush home. And it's still with me. I feel so bad I didn't do something to take care of these 2 homeless people. It would have been so easy just to drop into CVS and make their life a little bit more comfortable for a day or two.
So let me piggyback. That's a beautiful story to piggyback on Sharon. It's one of the things I've been most struck by this job. But the guy who runs it is Dr. Absan Galad, who's his vision to try to create primary care out there. And one of the things he said, that very first slide where I showed the compassion and the cleanups, that was inspired by him, because one of his points was, if they see us out there, and the doctors out there with this person that everybody's just ignoring, and they're spending a long time bandaging their legs, putting them together, and someone else is giving them socks and doing these things, it makes everybody else think, wait a minute, I could lean more that way. I could actually add a sock. I could actually do these extra things along the way. And we all have got both sides going on all the time, I think. It's easy to say, what's that person doing? It's easy to say, can I give her some underwear? My favorite story to finish that example, so we were in a park and there was this guy on the street and we helped him. What was only wrong was a sprained ankle. But the doctor was very careful and put the ace bandage around, taking care of him. And then we're walking around, and the guy who's like the security of this regular park, he's like, "What are you guys doing spending time with that guy over there?" And I said, "Well, he's a veteran, actually. And he sprained his ankle. He's trying to get things back together. And we're trying to change his view Oh, yeah, is it really? You can see it. That's what I mean about the perspective, seeing him from a different perspective. The same person can look different through different eyes. Um, my favorite naked story, though, is we were at Whittier Narrows at the park there, where they have a lot of homeless services come by on Tuesday mornings. And there's two guys in a gigantic fight. And one of them is stark naked, even though it's cold. And there's this huge fight, and they're wrestling and punching each other. And finally, the one guy wearing clothes says, I'm sick of this. And he's swearing up a storm. And I always try to help him. He's, oh, I'm mean in this. And he storms off and gets in his car and drives off. And everybody's kind of watching this from a distance. And our community health worker, she goes in the back of our truck and she finds a pair of underwear and pants, walks over to this guy who's just been in this fight, who's now sitting in a park bench naked, and says, hey, I think you need these. And he puts them on. And then when the police showed up 10 minutes later, he didn't look like a person stuff. He was back together. And so that impetus of, can I offer some help, can be something that can bring someone back from the brink of crisis.
Yeah.
But it's hard. This whole thing is super hard.
I just love your caring soul, Mark Ragins. I just love your caring soul. You could be a rich psychiatrist in Beverly Hills, and you chose this life and this arena of research to relate to all of these mentally ill people. You ran that Long Beach village for years, which I know a lot of people who were psychotic came out of there with a functioning life. And so I just think you're one of the most valuable human beings in the struggle of mental illness that I've ever met. I want to thank you.
That's way too high of a pedestal.
No. And
because one of the points I'm trying to make, by the way, I appreciate it, by the way, but one of the points I'm trying to make is that it takes lots of people. You don't need to be special, dedicated something or other. You need to be caring. You need to be committed. You need to be curious. Go, Mel. Before she.
Yes, Mel.
Go for it.
Thank you.
I couldn't say. I couldn't tell that was me exclamation point or Mel. I really like that. I might do me exclamation point on my next time.
It's me.
Exactly.
It's me.
Wouldn't that be good?
Yeah.
And I'm here thanks to Sharon. And I did her family to family course. And I just can't say enough how much hope this gives, and to know what other people are doing. So I am relatively new to NAMI, 8 weeks. I'm so happy to be involved. Thank you. But I've had these ideas in my head and I just didn't know who was implementing them. Like I read about in Pasadena, not only a housing, but the Salvation Army did housing, but it included community services and jobs and those kinds of things. I've brought up here in Beverly Hills, there's been an empty building on Olympic, and it's a perfect place for a 2-story community center. I mentioned to Sharon how valuable as a kid I loved the YMCA as a drop-in place, like you suggested. You go, you have a gym, you get to have people. And I read today that the LAPD is they're trying to have non-emergency calls, meaning perhaps homeless and things, be addressed by non-police people.
I saw that article.
And I was going to add what you had mentioned about purpose and drugs. So Sharon knows I'm primarily here because of my son, but my brother, I now really understand psychosis, and it took me a little while to really get it, but he is a heavy marijuana user. I don't think in our lifetime, he would have ever known how much he was spending on marijuana and think that that was normal. And he thinks he's the second coming. He thinks he's a Messiah. But he's also a great person. And now I know I can't argue with him to try and get him to think otherwise or point out that he's wrong or that he shouldn't share these opinions. And somehow he's working. He has a job at a restaurant and service industry. He's learned to kind of zip it when he's he's not trying to convince everybody they ought to be smoking cannabis and reading about the Bible and Hashem, or they're cursed like I am. And Sharon has given me tools to kind of go like, wow, it must feel really awful if you think I'm cursed because I'm not smoking cannabis and reading the Bible every day like you are, so to find out about their feelings. So I'm curious about your book as far as relating to the psychosis experience. So thank
Sure.
you for everything, for being here.
You're welcome, and that's why I included actually all of those book references along the way. Mine is particularly about the psychosis. Ken Duckworth gives you other ideas of programs NAMI's running, and if you end up, and I'm not at all kind of prejudiced, if you end up saying, hey, I do want to do something at Drop-In Center, go talk to the people who are doing it scattered around both here and other places. I haven't been to Step Up on 2nd Street in a decade. I assume it's still there. Our lamp is a little overwhelming because it's in the heart of Skid Row. I go once a month to a place in North Hollywood run by a church there that has Drop-In, and they try to do it politically. They don't make it open all the time, so the neighborhood starts thinking they're a nuisance to get rid of them. They appear for I think it's 2 mornings a week. It's a temporary community. Everybody comes and gets food and various things in case management help, and then it disappears. But it's a very welcome place. They all look forward to that time together, but it's not like it creates, there's huge encampments all around us so they don't get thrown out because it's in a reasonable neighborhood in North Hollywood.
Isn't that in a church, Mark?
Yeah, it's right outside the church. NoHo, what's the name of the church there?
Is it Episcopal Church?
I think so.
I think
Maybe
it's
that or
an
Methodist.
Episcopal church in
Is it
in
Episcopal or
North Hollywood.
Methodist?
Oh, well, anyway. Yeah,
But-
we
but-
should all
but-
go visit that when they
Yeah,
do that.
the lady's been doing it for forever, who's the minister there and really knows, it's got a nice handle on how to do things like that. But you can find people who are doing things, and everyone should end up looking different. It isn't a cookie cutter or something. It is worth also, I mean, the granddaddy who wants to be the cookie cutter, which I don't believe in cookie cutters, is Fountain House in New York. And it's worth either looking, you can go visit if you're in New York for some other reason, but also they have recipe books of here's how to set up, here's what's important, and look at their principles, because they've been around since the 70s, and many people are inspired along the way from the work that they've done. They think that psychiatrists are too damaging to let around because we ruin their clubhouse environment and start making everybody into patients instead. So they don't let psychiatrists in as part of the treatment. They when they came to visit the village, they said, hey, you're sitting here and you're not ruining this clubhouse environment. I didn't know a psychiatrist could do that.
Mark, I looked up Courtney Harding, and I put in the chat a link to an education class, How Vermont Discovered Possibility Recovery. I hope that is the same person you were referencing.
It probably is. You got Vermont. I can look, but this is from Mad in America. So Mad in America is a very strange site, but if you want a wide open Wild West, you can find stuff there.
But Courtney Harding had an article about
she's actually doing this is her actually doing it herself. So 2 things about Courtney. Looking at this, I just clipped on your thing. One is that picture is a good 30 years old. Courtney is 80 years old now. And 2 is she is not a dramatic speaker. Her material is really quite striking and the stuff, but she doesn't have the same level. She calls it that she's volume challenged. So you have to go preparing to do more work to pay attention to her. Of course, it's good stuff, but it's not going to carry you with the emotional inspiration sort of stuff. Isn't her strong point? But yes, that's the right Courtney. It's great to see that. See, that's what I call inspiration. See, you would say I'm only 62. Courtney's 80 and she's still at it.
I was going to ask a quick other
Go
little tiny logistics question, because how do you feel about the fact we don't have telephones on the streets anymore? What do we call them? Payphones. And something like that, that's kind of a way to connect people.
So they handed out a jillion Obama phones, and almost all of them have disappeared. Many of the people do not have phones anymore to connect to them, and they can't charge them anymore when they got them. So one of the services that the North Hollywood's got every time it's there is this bank of chargers, and people come put their phones next to to charge up your phones is actually a valuable service, and people are giving away chargers, sorts of things. I don't think people are going to go back to paying for phones. I think you could do, this is another one. When you think about what kind of services, that was one of the ones I thought of, but I thought would be a good thing to run is a phone charging bank. And you can use it if you let me charge if you want your phone charged here, you have to let someone else use it to make one telephone call. So you're helping somebody else and not just getting something for you, or something like that to help people make calls. But I think we have a better chance of letting people use our phones than setting up pay phones, and they're going to come with quarters or something, or I don't even know how much. I don't even know if that's possible anymore.
Dr. Ragins, NAMI Westside LA has a whole program to create a drop-in center, and we have our co-president Adeline Fagans, who's designed this drop-in center, and we want to put it somewhere in the middle of LA, like Lamert Park or somewhere, and we've got it ready. And we're just trying to raise more money for it. We all want to do this, a place and then we would hire people to run it for us, to be there. Someone like you who's warm and knowledgeable about, homeless people with addiction and mental illness, and who really has a deep understanding of these problems. Maybe it would just be open in the daytime and not the night, but we really think that way. We've been talking about it a long time, our board.
I wonder if you could grab some innovations money from the Mental Health Services Act for that.
Yeah.
All right, I'll tell you an inspirational story like that.
Okay.
This is from Wellington, New Zealand. I really like speaking at invitations from places like Wellington, New Zealand, to give me a plane ticket to get there. So I go to Wellington, New Zealand, and they've had two things that struck me. One is their equivalent of NAMI is called Schizophrenia Alliance or something like that. They were running a homeless drop-in center in Wellington. This is maybe 15 years ago. And what happened is the more they ran it, the more they valued these person-centered rehabilitative things, and the less they focused on, we got to get everybody on meds. And they began allying much more with their consumers instead of fighting against them in the kind of battles. We see that a little less now, but we saw that a lot like 20 years ago. But my favorite spot was, then they built, so in the Maori words, it's a word, I think it's called hangi, I can't remember this. It's supposed to be your home village, this building. And this is for people who had no home base. And it was the most whopper-jawed, bizarre building. They'd make it out of like wood scraps out of from the docks down in Wellington. I don't know how it passed any safety or anything. It would look like, that weird mansion in San Jose where everything's weird. But all these weird rooms and stuff, and it was all run by family members and consumers themselves. I don't think they had any money at all, or at least they didn't have any professional staff there. And the day I was there, this guy comes in off the street who looked like to weigh like 80 pounds, probably was strung out on heroin. And he was welcomed back with open arms, as though he's a long life friend. We've been worrying about you. How are you doing? Come on back and come get a shower and stuff. We sure are glad you're here. Being able to create a counterculture of acceptance.
Yeah.
AA meetings are incredibly good at this for alcoholics. We have to be incredibly good at it for people who are homeless, mentally ill. Go, Tiffany.
Yes. Yes. And Tiffany, did you
Hi.
have something you want to share, Tiffany?
Yes. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Hi, Mark. Nice to see you again.
I know you from maybe this from last year.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. Yep. And you were nice enough to have an hour and a half conversation with me on your day off too.
Oh, did I?
Yeah. So
I do too many.
well,
Actually, you don't need to remind me to talk about. Go ahead.
So yeah, my son is 30 years old, and he lives with me. I'm divorced. His dad's Japanese, you might remember. In
I do
Japan,
remember.
pretty much
Yeah.
out of the picture. He's the youngest of 3 kids. His brother and sister don't really know how to relate to him, and they're really busy with their own lives. But I feel like he's existing and not living. I might be wrong, but the thing is that really frustrating is that he even started, he kind of reminds me of the Korean woman you mentioned. He doesn't talk. You don't know what's going on with him. He's still using the language that he created, and he's using more gestures now. It's like he wants to smoke, he goes like this instead of saying, and
Wow.
also he doesn't think I'm his mom. He doesn't call me mom. So in my situation, I don't even know how to help him. I don't even, I know, and I don't like the word recovery because it seems like that's like 100% to me. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. But he's on his meds. He takes them just because I make sure he does. And I'm sure if he was on his own, he would quit them cold turkey like he always does, And so one of my frustrations is I feel like the meds aren't really doing what I thought they would do. And I just don't know what else to do for him with, if anything, because I mean, he is very stubborn. He has not changed his mind. The good thing is that he's still a rapper in his mind. And it's not just in his mind, he's actually very talented, but I think he's really struggling with making, his brain is kind of disconnecting. I can see it in, like, I see him on the computer and he's redoing an image that was really nice in the beginning and now it's looking very strange and things like that. But I just don't know what to do. I'm by myself. I wish I had felt like I had a team. He does have a caseworker and his doctor now is better than his old doctor. He's with Coastal Asian Pacific Islander and Gardena because, he's half Japanese. I thought that'd be better. But yeah, I just don't know.
So I first, I'm sorry he's doing so badly, and that this stuff is just heartbreaking and really hard. And love him, he's drifting away in his own world is just really, really hard. That is what you mentioned. When I don't want to just a little self-serving about that. That is one of the things that pisses off people about recovery. That it seems like, wait a minute, you're talking about people doing really well or all the way better. How about this person who's struggling?
Right.
And there was a bunch of debate at the beginning of what word should happen, and recovery just sort of emerged, mostly because it comes out of a bunch of other traditions, like 12-step recovery, or trauma recovery, or rape recovery, or spiritual recovery, or stuff. And it's supposed to be a process and a journey.
Right.
And one of the recovery things is about, wandering in the wilderness and learning and getting lessons as you move along and trying to get back together. But I read something way back by R.D. Lang, some of you guys may know from way back in the 70s. He said, not everybody's on a journey. Some of them seem to be just confused and lost and fragmented. That you go with, that isn't actually growing or learning anything along the way. So that's, it seems to be going down and getting more fragmented. You talk about the picture getting worse rather than better, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I just feel like what you were saying about how, like, if they're not more like put in a position where they have to be higher functioning, like if he wasn't living with me, he would have to be communicating with people or not. But
and some people like
there's something,
some people like Debbie was talking about are on the streets doing things that they're avoiding community. They got that same, they're doing that same process by themselves, like the Korean lady I was describing. So this is kind of, I hesitate to even throw out the advice because you're struggling so hard, but I don't know if you remember from the book, from the last presentation, the 3 sides of the triangle for the psychosis are about
I remember.
self-identity and relationships and experiencing reality. And one of your things is, hey, just dragging him forward through the experiencing reality one of relying on the pills to do it alone isn't getting very far. And the other 2 are sinking badly. He's even distancing from the relationship with his mother by saying he's not his mother. And when you said, hey, I wish there was some purpose, and even that's kind of drifting away. I'll sort of, you can ask about improving meds, but that may be all the meds. One of the reasons our system gets overwhelmed is trying to have the meds do all 3.
Right.
It really can't. It may be that you can get a peer from like Project Return or something to come by to have someone else to connect or see if, because it may be that mom is a loaded role and you're also trying to do meds and you're also pushing a lot of things. Could somebody else come by to be connected in some way who's doing
Yeah,
that
I would
on
love to
purpose?
find someone. Yeah, that's a because
to
I'm his caregiver,
right,
and
and
so
that makes it
financially I have money that I can use to, find, services. I mean, he does have Medi-Cal, but yeah, I don't know if he'd communicate, but you're right. There might be a chance because he's not mom. Yep.
you guys might have even within your group. I don't know if you're, in my own words, if you've got some peer advocates working as part of your
There,
NUM, you'd be willing to go over there in
yeah.
this, maybe even this room, as far as I know, be willing to
Yeah,
try
I'll
and
look
see if
into
we can
that.
get some other people along the way. And where the very first thing you started with about the purpose or things, it may seem almost backwards, but I wonder even about, all right, we're gonna set up a Zoom concert for you to do your rap in front of people or something. You got to prepare. So there's, well, now you have to be a little cleaner to make this work, or we're gonna do that, or what's the background gonna look like, or stuff, or that it's actually some thing that
Outlet.
would strike him.
Yeah.
Like the other person talking about their family member using the pot and wants to be a profit based on that sort of thing. It's like, all right, so that's the back of the hand, but
Right.
they look
Right.
at themselves. How does it? But it's what you're seeing is how, and so far as how, when those two sides are both pretty broken, it's really hard. That's what's wrong with
So
the medical
hard.
model. It's very hard to fix it with just that one, and they get weaker and weaker and drift away more and more. And so you try to
Exactly.
start with one of the other two along the way. But
Exactly.
I don't envy the spot you're in by any means. This is
I
a
appreciate
lot of
that.
effort. We're struggling a lot.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and a lot of us care for Tiffany. A lot of us really care for her and really try to support her.
Thank you for sharing, Tiffany. And I did put our peer support groups link in the chat. If that
Yeah,
might
I
be
know he
service for
would
you.
not do peer support
Yeah.
because it's a stigma for him. It's admitting that he has an illness.
Yeah, you're going to have to, I think if you're going to make that work, you find somebody in the group who is also interested in rap and have them come by and say, I heard you can treat me a rap or do something together. Like,
right.
We used to have a guy. We used to have a guy in our program. He's a social worker, but he would go to people's houses and bring his guitar along. And he's a really bad guitar player, so you could say, "Hey, help me get my guitar playing better." And he'd sit there and play guitar for a while. And it's, these things go slow, and you go, "God, you're supposed to be a social worker, or doctor. What the hell are you doing playing guitar? Do something serious." But that is serious. Make a relationship.
Yep, that would be a good angle.
I'll tell you one other study that goes like that, although I'd have trouble digging it up. Actually, it's in the book, I think. So when they made up cognitive behavior therapy to try to talk to people about their delusions instead of trying to talk them out of them, how to cope better with them, they made this up in England, and there's this group, and they did these studies. And so they were doing this study. They made it with a group that was getting the cognitive behavior therapy, and then the control group was getting something called befriending, which is like somebody talking, trying to act sort of nice and friendly and asking how you do, like for an hour a week. And the study was people who had schizophrenia, who still had a bunch of voices and were taking their meds regularly and weren't using drugs because they didn't want all the rest of that to be interfering. And what they found was in 6 months, the people who had the cognitive behavioral therapy got better in both less voices and less positive symptoms, less negative symptoms and taking less care of themselves, and less depression by this hour a week of talking about the voices and talking about how you can cope better and not trying to talk you out of it, but see it from your hand and how you could deal with it better. The surprising reaction, the one that caught my eye when I saw their presentation, is the people with befriending also got better, just as much, actually.
Wow.
But that wasn't the end of the story. They did that for 6 months, every once a week for an hour doing this stuff, and then they stopped. And they went and found them a year later to follow up what happened. The ones who had just the befriending deteriorated with their friend left. Not as bad as if they never had the friend, but it did deteriorate. The ones with the cognitive behavioral therapy to actually learn how to cope better kept getting better even when the therapist wasn't there anymore, because they'd internalize some things to do. Which this is the difference between a therapist and a peer. Then that's, you should know something as a professional that's taken that. But what's striking is someone like your son, the data shows that just having someone come by an hour a week befriending as a peer, in effect, just that relationship one
Exactly.
can make us that they said that was the same difference as the Clozaril study showed, switching people from the regular antipsychotic to Clozaril. A friend was as effective as our most dangerous, powerful pill.
Yep. I do think he wants a friend. He's isolated all the time.
Yeah, so although he wouldn't come to your group, it may well be that if you went to or someone went to the group and said, is anyone willing, better for free than for money, but would anyone willing to come and do an hour a week? By the way, there's a whole program of this called Compeer. It was made up in, I think, Rhode Island or Massachusetts, someplace like that. I actually volunteered to do it, and I did it really crappy when I was a medical school student, where you just get regular people and you befriend people for like an hour a week doing stuff with them. So they have this friend around doing things. And you explicitly instruct people, do not try to be their therapist. Just be their friend. Don't see how you can fix their illness or something. And that's why I did it crappy, because I was like, oh, I'll hang out with people's good friends and learn how to be a therapist. And I was me already. But so I wouldn't, and besides, I didn't have a car and shit like that. But that's not really the point. That
thank you so much, Mark.
There's even this thing called Compeer that you can look up that does it. It probably still exists.
Compeer,
COMPEER.
Okay, I'll look it up.
I don't know that we have it here, but it gives them once again a model for how to set that up.
Recovery.
Thank you.
Is you need connection. Just need connection desperately. Anyone who wants recovery wants to move in that direction. Addiction needs connection. A mental illness needs connection. We have peer counselors that work one-on-one with individuals that don't have degrees, but they have MSWs or masters. And I'm telling you, they're so effective. They just are a friend. What's missing in your life?
And somebody like that might be willing to try with Tiffany's son.
I haven't played tennis in years. Well, let's play tennis. Just being a friend once a week.
Definitely.
It's so powerful and so healing.
Yep, I agree.
So thank you, Mark, for reminding us of that.
Thank you, Mark.
And thank you so much for this wonderful talk and wonderful.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure as always being with you guys. Hang in there with the various both joys and tragedies you're going through.
And Mark, I think we owe you some Tito's tacos. So let me know when Sharon and I can treat you to some tacos.
Or maybe we can just have that cart, just send them a whole wagon full of Tito's tacos. We need your home address though for that. Can we have your home address?
See how she is.
I'll follow up with you, Mark, and we can arrange something. I also just want to say a quick thank you to Janis Black Warner. This is her speaker series. Without her generous donations through the years, and her vision to create an opportunity for our community members to connect and really learn from experts in the field. It's just an invaluable resource. So thank you so much to Janis Black Warner for creating this speaker series, and to Sharon Dunas, our clinical mental health and president emeritus. She's just a trailblazer, and Mel, you couldn't have said it more eloquently, that you've learned so much, and she brought you into the fold. So welcome. We're very grateful to, welcome you to our community. And Sharon, you've touched so many lives. So thank you for facilitating and navigating all the questions this evening. It's always so wonderful to see you, and you bring so much to any group that you're a part of. So thank you for sharing, and thank you all for being here this evening. I know it's a Wednesday night, and we just appreciate your time. And Jean, it's great. Thank you for inviting someone else to join out from Antelope Valley, another NAMI affiliate. So it's just wonderful to have this sense of community. Mark,
I
thank
think
you
Mark-
again.
Mark Regan should
you.
speak for NAMI Urban LA. Are you connected with NAMI Urban LA, Mark?
Not particular. It's been a very long time.
I mean, you got to speak to them. Would you share, Aaron, Mark Ragins with Maddie and Harold?
Mark, we're going to
Just-
keep you busy.
Yeah. So make sure that they know about Mark Regans and listen to this talk today.
Yes,
because
I
he's
will.
gotta
I'll
go there,
tell
'cause
Harold.
They have
Yes.
so many homeless people in Inglewood too, you know, and between Inglewood
Everywhere.
down there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well,
Mark,
next time you're in
yours-
Lancaster, Mark, you'll have to let me know so we can meet up.
Yeah. Yes.
All
So
right.
just thank you from the
Take
bottom
care,
of
guys.
our hearts,
Take
Mark.
care,
Just-
You're
everyone.
welcome. It's been my pleasure. Take care,
And
everyone.
we're an
Thank you.
inspiration to all of us, just a total inspiration. Really. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Bye, everybody. See you. You know, I have a Saturday support group if anybody wants to come. Tiffany's often there, and I'm also a part of the Wednesday night support group. And Tiffany, I hold you in such high regard, and it's
Thank
such a
you.
struggle you being alone with this whole situation with your son. I really just hold you in
Thank
such high regard. I think about you sometimes during the week.
I appreciate it, Sharon. That means so much.
Yeah, you call me anytime.
I will. Yeah, I
I'm
want to
here
figure
for you.
out, something.
Yeah, I would like to do that.
Okay,
Okay, everybody, I'm
thanks.
gonna say
Have a
good
good
night.
night.
And Mel, nice
Bye.
to have you here, and Dana and Druhy, Cynthia, Sheila, Debbie. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
And Linda.